Well, good morning, everyone.
Oh, man, it's ready to go.
It looks like it's the appointed time. I just want to check to see, do we have any members who are virtual this morning?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll give us a heads up or show up on the screen when that happens. Well, then I just want to call the meeting to order and thank you all for being here this morning. Why don't we start with Kayla, would you call the roll this morning?
I'm happy to do that, Madam Chair. Mr. Baker. Mr. Campbell,
Here.
Council President Carlson,
Here.
Mayor Norton, Mr. Rybeck, Commissioner Tyne,
Here.
Chair Wheelock,
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Madam Chair, we do not have a quorum at this point in time, but we can proceed with informational items.
All right, so we will wait on the approval of the agenda and the approval of the minutes. Why don't we move forward to the public comment? Actually, I see, thank you. We just have member Ryback. Would you please note that for the record?
So
Does that
noted.
bring us to a quorum?
It does.
All right, well, then we will see if there's a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then in your packet, there is the minutes from the main meeting. Is there a motion to approve the main meeting minutes?
Move approval, Carlson.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, so now we will move to the public comment period. And before opening the public comment period, I'll remind anyone who wishes to address the board of a few things. Please state your name for the minutes, and we'd ask that you keep your comments to no more than 2 minutes so that if there are others, they have the chance to speak as well. Also, I understand that we've set up the meeting live stream. For those that are watching online, you can use the chat feature to indicate that you'd like to speak. So I'll now open the public comment period.
Thank you, Chair Wheelock and DMC board members. I'm Dan Collison. I'm the Director of Business Development and Public Affairs for Sherman Associates. Largely just saying hello. Sherman Associates was awarded the request for proposal by the City of Rochester's Civic Center North parking lot. We're proposing almost 300 units of both affordable and market rate units. And some of you know me from my past. I was a business executive in downtown Minneapolis, as well as a pastor. And so I've enjoyed the last 5 months of meeting a tremendous amount of community leaders, city staff, elected officials, and I'm really pleased to not only see that project come to its full fruition and bring 300 more units of housing, but explore others that might have community impact and help Rochester become a wonderful and expanding place that it already is, and even more. So for my part, I just want you to know who I am. I'm pleased to get to know Rochester. I told Mayor Norton at the DMC annual meeting, which was wonderful. Thank you, Patrick Sieve and DMC staff for a wonderful meeting, that I have been coming to Rochester for many reasons. And now it feels like I'm falling in love with the citizens, the restaurants, the people, the small business, and the leaders. So just an introduction. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And many of us I know have worked with Sherman and Associates in the past in different roles, and we wish you every success down here in Rochester on this project. Any other members of the public wanting to take advantage of the public comment period?
There is one on Zoom. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we'll give Cody just a minute.
My video is disabled. It won't let me start the video.
Well, we can hear you. So why don't we start with that? And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, and we'll happily listen to you for your comments.
Could you possibly enable my video? I would love to be seen too. I think it helps to see a face.
I'm not able to control.
Yeah, evidently that can't be done on our end.
It's actually a thing where I try to start video and it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
I'll work on it.
They're going to continue to work on that, but would you like to start your comments orally?
Sure. Okay. My name is Sarah. No last name for safety reasons, please. In the Hippocratic Oath, doctors promise to abstain from doing harm. It's time for DMC to follow suit. I live in a naturally occurring affordable housing apartment building that 3 Discovery Square seeks to destroy. Our community is more than 50% people of color, 3 seniors, immigrants, LGBT folks, and 20% people with disabilities, including myself, a disabled woman. My goal is to convert our building into a housing cooperative. We want to buy our building. We already have an investor, and because naturally occurring affordable housing is a very safe investment, we won't have trouble finding more. We won't ask you for $12.7 million, only to step aside and let us rise to our potential. I have met with Rochester Area Foundation, Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia, NCF, the state OIO, and other supporters. And I believe this goal aligns with your organization, Mr. Williams, Project for Pride in Living. Our building is full. There are vacant, falling apart houses on the same block that cover the same amount of area as our building and the parking lot behind it. It would be best to wait for those houses to be for sale as the site for 3 Discovery Square. I was forced from my previous home by residents at Discovery Square and was subsequently homeless for 5 months because there was nowhere accessible for me to live. It was extremely traumatic, and I am still suffering from increased pain and fatigue and further reduced ability more than 4 years later. DMC states reducing homelessness as a priority, but it has actually created more homeless people. Do you really want your legacy to be forcing the most vulnerable Mayo patients from their homes while we still grapple with a global pandemic? Remember, first, do no harm. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now close the public comment period, and I thank each of you for participating this morning. Patrick, perhaps.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just on that last comment, that's a short window where there are a lot of questions that we should logically be answering. And I'm just wondering if I could ask Patrick to send us a briefing of the board, sending us an email with some of the background on that, and then we can make a judgment on whether it's something that we should bring back. Is that okay?
Yeah, yes, Member Ryback, you beat me to the punch.
I'm so sorry.
I do think that some clarification also would be helpful perhaps in this moment, because I'm not sure that the property that was mentioned is really on the site of 3 Discovery Square. And so maybe I could ask Patrick if you could comment on that in the moment.
Madam Chair, members of the DMCC, indeed, the apartment building that Sarah is referring to is on a property across the street from proposed 3 Discovery Square. However, it was recently acquired by the developer of 3 Discovery Square. So that is potentially why there's a little kind of blurring of the description, but it's a 14-unit apartment building across the street from proposed 3 Discovery Square.
Thank you. And then the follow-up that would Member Ryback requested would be appreciated for all the board members.
All
right.
Madam Chair, I don't know if the city has any relevant, if you could make part of that analysis, whether the city has any relevant policies around acquisition, those kinds of things. If you could include that in that report, that would
Absolutely.
be great.
Happy to.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions on that matter? All right, seeing none, we'll move to the chair report. So I'll just very briefly cover this. I know we have a big agenda. I just wanted to say that I have been able to, with the progression on the pandemic, spend a little bit more time in Rochester since being elected chair in May. in no small part to meet with some of the members of the board and to spend some more time in the DMC area and in Rochester. Participated with a number of you on the DMCC and EDA board in informal meetings over the summer to help advise and provide commentary to staff who are working on the proposed work plan and the capital budget, which we will see today. Today we'll also approve our Form 990, discuss downtown tax capacity, and hear a community housing update. So that'll follow on the heels of the opening comments. In addition, I, along with many of you, were here for the DMC annual meeting last week. I just want to also acknowledge the work of the staff of the EDA and so many others for helping to pull off such a great meeting last week, or the annual meeting. And I love that we move around the community and that we're able to really see different parts of the community and highlight different opportunities. And the artwork on the ramp was finished in time for us to enjoy that evening and be a backdrop for the celebration. It was just really a lovely way to highlight a number of community efforts at the annual meeting, and whoever arranged the weather did a phenomenal job. So
Nice job.
So I'd like to also thank the EDA and city staff for their work with DEED over the spring and summer as they audited our public and private investments. That's an important part of our accountability. And this is a key step in releasing the state's DMC infrastructure aid. And on June 30th, we were informed by Commissioner Grove that DMC qualified for the 29.2 million in aid this year. So that is fabulous to have that state investment in the community of Rochester. I'd also like to thank the city for revising and resubmitting our federal transit grant application, which is asking for more federal funding to support the improved project measures that you may remember that we endorsed in May. And to congratulate the city and Mayo Clinic for successfully negotiating the terms of an operating agreement for the bus rapid transit system. We I think, acknowledge that by email, but it's great to, again, have that in the record of this meeting. It's a great example of the collaborative nature of our work and a gracious acceptance of responsibility by this community's major employer. And last but not least, speaking of Mayo, in July, the clinic and its employees were recognized as the #1 hospital in the world for the 7th consecutive year. I think that is also worthy of our congratulations. So these are a few of the things that happen between our meetings and behind the scenes, and just want to make sure we note them in the public record. So with that, we're going to move on to the consent agenda, and we have 3 items: the DMCC insurance, the 2023 regular meeting schedule, and the 2022 budget, the year-to-date update. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any items that anyone is seeking to pull off? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? And it sounds as though perhaps Mayor Norton has joined us. Is that correct?
I've been here since the beginning. There's just some technology issues. My apologies for you not being able to tell.
No worries. We're happy to have you here, and we'll note that for the record as well. And we know that you are at an important event, a meeting out of the city. And so should you find that you need to leave the meeting, please make sure that you either text or notify us in chat so that Cody can let us know. I want to make sure we capture your participation on any comments about the public projects budget. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item number 8, which is the DMCC Form 990. This is regularly reviewed by our board, and I'd like to invite Craig Poppenhagen from Clifton Larson Allen to present our 990 and State Charitable Organization report. So welcome, Craig. I see you getting all settled in. We'll turn it over to you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members. Very happy to be here this morning. And let's see, there we go. Gave me lots of control today. That's scary, huh? In the board packet, I noticed that I take up the majority of the board packet, so that's pretty exciting. But I'll need a very small amount of time. So what we're doing today is kind of our annual routine now of bringing the Form 990 for DMCC to the board in draft form for you to review and approve. I'll just hit the high points as we go. Some of the high points in the 990. So all the financial information does reconcile back to the DMCC audited statements, which were issued a few months ago. Part 3, and in the packet, it's actually page 27 in the board packet. We state the DMCC's organizational purpose, which is its mission, basically. Page 31 of the board packet is a summary of governance policies. So that's something important in the eyes of the IRS to see how organizations are governed. It talks about committees, minutes of meetings are kept and retained. There are conflict of interest policies for you as board members and members of management as well. And then most importantly, probably a draft of the Form 990 has been provided to you as board members to review prior to being submitted to the IRS. Page 32 of the board packet, we list out the board members. The board members serve without compensation, so gratis on the board. Schedule B, page 47 of the 990. We list out the contributors. The contributor information is redacted in the public inspection copy. So just note that. Schedule R, which is page 57 of the Form 990, lists out related parties, that being DMC, EDA. A couple other points. There's no 990T. There was no unrelated business income for 2021. That's been normal, pretty part of the annual routine that there's no unrelated business income. So just wanted to point that out. Our actual filing deadline is November 15th, so we have plenty of time to get the forms submitted. Accompanying the Form 990 is the Minnesota Charitable Organization Annual Report. This goes to the State Attorney General's office in Minnesota. High points here, page 62 of the board packet. There have been no changes in DMCC's tax exempt status. No changes in organizational purpose. No compensation paid to board members. That's on page 63 of the board packet, and carries with it the same November 15 filing deadline. A couple things that we do. Basically, the annual registration is filed online through Minnesota Secretary of State. DMCC is in good standing through December 31, 2021. Annual renewal to be filed online. This is something that your team will have to do, but will have to be filed online for 2023. That concludes my prepared remarks. I mean, what you can see is largely the return is informational. So,
well, thank you. Are there any questions, issues for clarification? All right, seeing none, we have a resolution in our packet on page 67 that the charitable organizational annual report 990 are approved and authorization to file. Is there a motion for that resolution?
So moved.
So second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
And Madam Chair, with Mayor Norton participating remotely, I think we should do a roll call vote from
Okay.
this point on. So I'm happy to facilitate that.
All right, Kayla, would you do a roll call?
Absolutely. Mr. Baker, Mr. Campbell,
Aye.
Council President Carlson,
Aye.
Mayor Norton,
Aye.
Mr. Ryback,
Aye.
Commissioner Tyne,
Aye.
Chair Wheelock,
Aye.
Mr. Williams.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to one of our presentations today on metrics, which is, I know, near and dear to many of our hearts. So Patrick, we're going to turn this over to you and ask that you actually introduce this agenda item.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, members, Cody, am I able to draw? No. As we're getting the presentation on the screen, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm joined by teammate Catherine Malmberg. Each meeting, we have set a standard of having a discussion about one of the 5 metrics that we are accountable to in our development plan, metrics associated with job growth, with tax base, with capital investment, and with, a 5th metric associated experience, and a 5th metric associated with strategic plan, keeping our plan up to date. So in May, we did an update into the private investment target, where we heard an overview of Mayo Clinic's 5-year capital plan to give a peek into anticipated capital development. This month, we are prepared to discuss and unpack a bit the metric associated with new tax revenue. So our metric anticipates $7 to $8 billion in net new tax revenue. And then in November, we'll come back and have a discussion about experience, metrics associated with experience. So today, we're going to focus on tax base. And again, this comes out of our development plan, and each of these meetings, we dive into one of them and look more closely at a portion of that metric. And so with that, Catherine, I'll let you take over and dive into the tax revenue.
Great. Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone.
Welcome.
So as Patrick said, this relates to one of our 5 main goals over a 35-year period to generate $7.5 to $8 billion of net new tax revenues. So where are these taxes coming from? Well, they come from 3 main buckets, so to speak. Operating taxes, which are corporate income taxes as businesses here grow. Personal income taxes, those new jobs, which is another one of the goals of the DMC, generate new jobs, and those generate new income taxes. Sales taxes that occur within the district, and hotel taxes. The other category is construction, right? Construction itself generates a significant number of new jobs, taxes, et cetera, during construction. And this is the deed certified investments within the district. We count those as new construction taxes, related taxes. And then finally, property taxes, which are the property tax revenues from land and properties within the district. I will note that Minnesota provider tax for medical services exists here as well. That's a 1.8% rate as a side note. But here today, we're here to talk about property taxes, get into a little more detail on that. So some of you may recall from the first 5-year update of the DMC development plan, we did an analysis with a consultant called Urban 3, where they looked geospatially at tax revenue across the district and where that tax value and capacity has shifted from 2015 to 2020. So when you see the growth in these sort of spikes here, that's that growth in the tax value and capacity of those parcels within the district. But this can be kind of a broad and abstract way of thinking about it. So today, what we're really going to do is dive into how does it work on one particular property within the district and look at that as a little case study. So in this case, we're going to be looking at the Hue 50-unit apartment building with ground floor retail space at 401 First Avenue. and look a little more closely at what happened with this particular project. So you can see on the left there, image of the property, which was a small commercial building with the majority of the site being a surface parking lot. And the annual property taxes that they were paying in 2019 were about $20,000 with a taxable market value of about $600,000. And then an image from 2021 where we have 50 new homes for people and a ground floor retail tenant, and the annual property taxes for 2022 at $126,000 and a taxable market value of roughly $13 million. So timeline, you could see sort of how the property was entitled, and then Ackerberg Group came in to develop it. Once it was entitled, 50 new homes delivered in August of 2020. Retail tenant opened later that year, and then the property was purchased from the developer. And here are a couple of the companies. So that's another sort of thing to think about when we think about these investments that happen within the DMC district, right? There are all of these other companies that are involved and paying wages to their employees. And as befitting a state initiative here, these companies are from Minneapolis, Rochester, Mora, St. Paul. So a lot of different places within the state of Minnesota participated. And like I said, these are just some of the main companies involved in this project. So here's a quote from the developer, Stu Ackerberg, in the Post Bulletin, talking about the excitement that he felt of what was happening here in Rochester and why he was excited to do his company's first development here in the local market. So this was a really great thing to hear. So again, looking at that increase on that one property, and again, you know, taxes are complex, you know, and evolving. There's not one simple way to look at tax policy, obviously. Tax capacity versus the actual taxes collected, but we're trying to give you an understanding of what happened with this particular property, but also what if we thought about, we looked at 14 different properties that occurred in the DMC that were developed in the DMC in the first, 5 to 7 years here, and added up what those pre-development taxes collected were, and then the 2022 taxes. And so this comes also with a caveat, which we'll be talking about in a minute here, that with TIF, some of those taxes paid are then reimbursed back to the developer for a period of time, but then eventually those agreements expire and then that tax base can be fully realized. So we do have a long-term horizon when we're thinking about building the tax basis for the city out of the DMC. So what are some of the key takeaways? First, as I was just discussing, TIF does have an impact. It delays the public receipt of some of these potential new revenues. But infill development also costs less to a community. When we're building in the downtown walkable core, those streets are already there, those sewer systems are already there, we have police, we have fire. And so it's a pretty efficient way, location geographically to put denser development. The new commercial buildings can bring new net revenues. These 14 buildings we looked at were on underutilized lots primarily, and they multiplied potential for tax revenue by about 10-fold. Current residents are benefiting because new development reduces the demand on the current property owners' tax burdens. Opportunity remains. Downtown Rochester is home to many vacant and undeveloped sites. We'll be talking about some of them today. There's the Civic Center North Lot, there's the Riverfront, there's the West Transit Village, a lot of locations that are primarily surface parking today that could provide great new opportunities.
Catherine, if I could just ask you to clarify on the fourth bullet, when you talk about current residents are benefiting, you mean in the community, since the tax obligation is figured on a community-wide basis, not just for the DMC zone? Is that correct? Can you
Right. So
elaborate on that?
the levy is set, and now there are more players, more capacity to share the burden of that levy as the tax capacity of these parcels increases in the DMC district.
Question?
Yes.
Just on the TIF, in terms of this question about current residents benefiting, does a portion, and do I have it right that a portion of the TIF actually goes into affordable housing or is set aside in any way for affordable housing? Do I have that right?
Chair and Member Williams, yes, you do have that right. The city does have a policy to retain a certain amount of TIF into an affordable housing pool.
Which again is
That's right.
important and is something that benefits the community, I think, more broadly.
Exactly.
Madam Chair.
Member Ryback?
One of the reasons why I believe this is an important exercise is that it really looks at the direct financial benefit for the city of Rochester. I mean, there's certainly massive numbers of reasons why beyond this, there are benefits, employing, creating more employment and et cetera, but this is the most tangible thing we're looking at. So as I look at that, I see one piece of property that was vacant. And because of the investment that Destination Medical Center has helped spur, the city's getting a little bit over $100,000. So just generally you could say, okay, because that vacant lot became this project, you can say hire a cop. Does that police officer, does that block take one police officer's entire body of work over a year? The answer, having directed police in much more high crime areas, and this is the answer is, yeah, the city got a good deal out of it because that cop can also do other work. That's the really basic direct thing is Destination Medical Center raising my taxes? Now, the question I want to ask is when you aggregate all that, if you take the Destination Medical Center boundary, what percentage, and if you're not ready for this, let's get the number back, but what percentage of the city's tax base did that represent before this started and what now? In other words, we used to argue this in downtown versus other parts of Minneapolis. Downtown carried 50 to 60% of the city's tax burden. Do you have that number for how that has changed since this started?
Yeah, we do have that number from the 2020 update. So we'll be continuing to update that figure. At that point in time, I believe the DMC district represented roughly 1% of the land area and was generating 14% of the tax revenue there. So we'll update that though, because I know.
So that's 2020. So I'm sorry, Madam.
Yeah,
That's before 2020. It's coming into 2020.
It's coming
So
into
anything
2020. Yes.
2020, 21, 22, all of this stuff that we've seen over the past 3 years isn't counted in that.
Is not yet captured. That's right. Yep. So we'll work on updating that. Yep.
And as a follow-up to that, Catherine, do you recall what that percentage was? I mean, the land base wouldn't have, might not have changed, probably wouldn't have changed unless there was some bigger change for the footprint of the city itself. But do you remember in 2015 what the percentage was of the downtown? If it was 14% in 2020, do you recall what it was in 2015?
I don't. I can get back to you on that.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions, comments?
Got one more, just
Yes,
in terms of, I'm thinking about return on investment and what DMC dollars went into either that project or those 14 projects. And do we look at that kind of comparison at all?
I think that's a great next step to develop this further. We do know that out of those 14, I believe 12 of them did have TIF associated with them. And so there were 2 that did not. And then that was a mix of sometimes it was city versus city and DMC. And so we could certainly develop this analysis.
At some point, whenever that makes sense, it would be good just to kind of see that.
Yeah.
Patrick?
Oh.
On this
You go ahead,
point,
yeah.
Patrick?
No, it was on a prior point that the
Okay.
Mayor Ryback made.
Could I build on Paul's point? Because one of the things that the city and Destination Medical Center have to look at is when do you put an investment down to make more back? $500 million of investment is coming in and that's supposed to generate dramatically more. So in the case, I remember a big controversy we had maybe year 2 of Destination Medical Center about a relatively small hotel across from St. Mary's, and it wanted a pretty significant amount of tax increment. I remember arguing against it, which finally prevailed that it got less than they were asking, but it was very controversial with the concern that it would shut off investment in the town. I think that was a very important moment for this group in retrospect, both the city and Destination Medical Center, because we sent a message that the city and Destination Medical Center, we're going to be driving a tough bargain, because every time you take tax increment, you're saying, I'm going to delay what the city gets in hope you're going to get more. But if we, by driving a better deal back then, we reset the market. I think that's a really important point here. We need to make public investments. That's our job, to leverage more investment. But I'm proud of the city and Destination Medical Center for not just throwing those dollars around, but negotiating tough so that we're not delaying the tax base that the city deserves.
Patrick, if we could hold one more moment, Member Carlson.
Sure. We talk a lot about the messaging out to our residents to make sure that we are demonstrating the value that DMC has to our community overall, and thinking more broadly than patients and visitors to our community. Can we go back to that slide? I was just going to speak off of it.
Which one? I'm
We
sorry.
were just on.
I apologize.
That's okay. So there are a few really important messages in this slide, I think. Obviously, the idea that from a tax perspective, residents are benefiting. We hear a lot that DMC is raising our taxes. So, and what's the benefit to us? There's an exact, demonstration of what the benefit is from a tax perspective. This comment, or this second bullet around infill development costs less to a community, we as a city have prioritized that in our comprehensive plan and continue to move in that direction, and decisions we're making. That's a really hard one for our community, or for many members of our community, to think about why adding density is important. But from a property tax perspective, it's hugely important, because if we're building where we already have this infrastructure in place, including in the DMC zone, we are really preventing significant increases in our levy increase and other infrastructure costs. So I think there's some really key messages in here that I hope we can continue to speak outward into our community to demonstrate the value of DMC.
I want to just endorse that comment from Council President and Member Carlson about the challenge of aging infrastructure. And there's not a community in Minnesota that isn't struggling with aging or inadequate wastewater treatment plants, sewer systems, street systems. And without adding that tax base, that challenge for community residents of meeting those needs of aging infrastructure really becomes a significant challenge or untenable. So the opportunity to reset for this community for not just the next few years, but for the next few generations, and to think about revitalizing and attracting new investment to meet the current demands that this community has is critically important. Patrick, you had a comment that you wanted?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, excuse me, and channel my inner Dale Martins in here for a second to say that when we talk about the additional 100,000 approximately that this property is paying into the pie of taxes that are collected, it isn't an additional $100,000 unless the city increases its levy to add a cop or to change services. So this is simply additional contribution to satisfy the total levy. So the levy and services provided are a decision made by city council that this property and others will contribute to.
So that just raises one more question from me. So is this the total tax obligation, or is this only for the city levy?
This is total tax
Okay,
obligation. Thank you.
And this project did not receive public funds, so there is not a TIF on
Okay,
that one.
thank you.
Madam Chair.
Member right back.
Knowing that we're going to be talking about transportation later, I want to tie that a bit to this. Remember, this was there's no building on it, but it wasn't vacant. It was used for surface parking. And I think, a few years ago, the quickest observation you could make about downtown Rochester is there's a lot of good stuff going on, but wow, look how many vacant blocks there are that are taken up by parking. If we can move that dial in any possible way. Now think about Discovery Square 1 and Discovery Square 2, surface parking lots that now have not only great buildings in and of themselves, but catalytic development that can lead to others nearby and doing that. That's what we're trying to do and why we're trying so hard to make sure that the transportation strategies and the transit villages make it possible for someone to not have to drive up to the front door of Mayo, even those who don't have a valet, and take up all that surface lot. Every single time we fill a surface lot, we make a positive move for the homeowners of Rochester, lowering their tax burden. So I believe every homeowner, even if they don't care at all about Destination Medical Center, should cheer loudly when they see a surface parking lot done, and should be extremely supportive of the state putting money in a way that they're doing in no other city in the state. It's the state putting money in to make sure that people can have alternatives outside the core to park their car.
Member Carlson.
Not to speak for Commissioner Tyne, but there's also a significant benefit to the county,
Yes.
the broader, and the school district.
Say taxpayers.
Mhm. All right, any other discussion or comments? Thank you. Obviously, this is a key area of interest for the members and frankly for the community to measure the impact of the state and local investments in revitalizing and attracting investment to the DMC area downtown. Okay, now we're going to move on. We have comments from the EDA Board President. I believe Dr. Clark Otley is available to offer a few comments. And we're just going to give Cody just a nanosecond here to make that adjustment. But Dr. Otley, can you hear me and can we hear you?
I can hear you, Pam. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We aren't seeing you, but we'll again happily listen to your commentary. And thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, Chair Wheelock and members of the board. Apologies that I'm not able to be with you today. I'm down at Mayo Clinic in Arizona. Following my remarks today and any questions you have, we'll be considering the 2023 DMC funding request at this meeting. The capital improvement plan and work plan are really thoughtful, and they reflect the input that we've heard from you, the board, and the city of Rochester over the last year. Patrick and our city colleagues will present the capital plan and the annual work plan in greater detail. But first, I'd like to just take a few minutes to talk about how the EDA approaches the work that you direct us to do. So with every project that we advance for your consideration and every program that we implement after you approve it, we've got options and opportunities. Most obviously, as an economic development agency, there are opportunities to strengthen our city as the premier destination medical center in the world, while also generating new jobs, attracting new investments, and building new tax capacity for our city and state. But there are also ways to approach the work that we could make it more about the sum of pipes, pavement, and paychecks. For instance, when we spoke last, I highlighted the evolution of our community efforts around construction workforce participation. Our construction workforce efforts originated as a requirement of the DMC state statute, which directed the city to produce a targeted workforce and business participation plan. From there, this board actually increased the goals and importantly, dedicated resources to building the local industry capacity that allows us to achieve those goals. From that springboard, the city leapt forward and earned support from the Bloomberg Philanthropies Global Mayor's Challenge. And to the point, I see Mayor Norton is on the call and is actually in Washington championing this work at the National Equity and Labor Summit, which is hosted by the U.S. Department of Labor. So well done for everybody. And thank you, Mayor, for representing us so well. Now, with the targeted participation plan well established and well resourced, we're making similar intentional proactive efforts to achieve progress in how we incorporate other aspects, including community engagement, health, affordability, sustainability, and equity into our projects and programs. Our intention is that by being thoughtful and purposeful in how we complete our work, the EDA can make recommendations to you and the City Council that fulfill the broadest vision of DMC. After all, being thoughtful and purposeful is essentially what DMC is all about. So here's a real world example of what I mean. A year ago, the EDA, City and Mayo Clinic staff began to realize that the proposed bus rapid transit route and the station designs were acceptable, but they were just not ideal. The station designs failed to meet the climate control requirements of a system that we said should be as good or better than driving your own car to a downtown parking spot. Also, the alignment on the east end made the station locations inaccessible to community members who make use of our community assets like the library in Mayo Park, too distant from nearby neighborhoods on the east side of downtown, and it enables our full potential as we plan for the future redevelopment of the riverfront. So to address these shortcomings, city staff and the EDA revised our recommendation to you and the city council. We recommended improving project elements and amending our request for the federal transit grant funding. We noted that our recommendation would increase our request of the federal government, thereby decreasing the relative share of local funding, which remains unchanged, and will likely result in a lower but still competitive project rating. We could have left the project as it was with its shorter timeline, lower cost, and slightly more favorable project rating in place, but our proactive, purposeful evaluation framework, in which we do our best to consider access and equity, sustainability and affordability, and community support, required that we bring these questions to you for resolution. You responded by asking questions and then endorsing the submission of an amended federal grant application. The process took longer, it was more complicated, but we believe a better long-term solution will be achieved as a result. Now, as we look to 2030 and investing in the riverfront or Soldiers Field or business recruitment, I want you all to know that we'll take the time to give serious consideration to these projects as they evolve and come to you with the best proposals. The DMC initiative, with its unprecedented long-term commitments from the state, county, city, and Mayo Clinic, and the generational benefits that commitments such as this can make, requires that we get it right, even if it means, as it did for rapid transit, that we take a second look and double back to make the path better. So thank you all for your leadership on that specific project and for those you will be considering in the future. Those are my comments, and with that, Chair Wheelock, thank you for the time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Otley. Any questions for Dr. Otley? Seeing none, I want to be mindful of Mayor Norton or Member Norton that is on Zoom and to provide her the opportunity before we launch into this to see if there are any comments that she would like to make about the proposed capital budget.
Thank you so much for this. I am in a lobby, so I'm going to talk quickly so you can get back to the meeting at hand. But a couple things I did want to mention. I am in Washington, D.C. at the Equity and Focus conference that the Department of Labor is hosting. We are actually here presenting on behalf of the city and frankly DMC about our Bloomberg grant and National League of Cities work about equity in the workplace. We know that DMC and the city have workforce goals, and that's what this conference is all about, including increasing women in the construction and trades. So Chow Matella will be presenting this afternoon, and I'm on a panel here in just a little bit. And it just really came home to me about how important the goals that DMC was given by the state, and that we have all reviewed and increased over time the work that Jory Johnson does for us in that area, how important it is to look at and measure as we go. I also wanted to just comment quickly. I really appreciated Dr. Otley's comments and support the comments that he made. The budget's been an interesting process to go through. I want folks to know that we spent a lot of time on that. There was a group that met regularly to discuss the budget. I think the concept of flexibility that Dr. Otley mentioned in the budget and on our projects and plans is vital. I would say a great example of that was our recent notice of receiving almost $20 million for the 6th Street Bridge, which is in part in the DMC district. And we need that flexibility to address that influx of funds that will impact this area. And so, as we look at our projects, we know we've had to do some changing and prioritizing based on opportunities that avail themselves to DMC and the city. And I think that's great. So I'm very supportive of the budget. I also want to say that I'm very excited for the projects that we have ahead that will be discussed, including bus rapid transit and many other opportunities that you're going to be covering here in the next few minutes. So I will stay on for a little bit longer, but I wanted to be clear to voice my support for the budget and the work that's being done, even though I cannot perhaps be there for the actual vote here in a few moments as I go back in to give my panel presentation. But thank you all for those few minutes.
Thank you, Member Norton. Member Rybeck.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate those comments, Mayor, because I think they're part of a incredible progress that's been made. And it builds on the chair's comments a couple minutes ago about there isn't a community anywhere in the country that isn't dealing with aging infrastructure. In the early years of Destination Medical Center, there was a very complicated dynamic where our job was to figure out where should the state dollars be invested for infrastructure that moves work forward. And the city was thinking, where does that money, where does the city's capital budget go? Those were two isolated efforts by us sitting next to each other. It is a very different story now. And Council President, I really want to thank you for your leadership in getting the council and DMC together on a common piece. If a sewer needs to be added, the city normally would pay for that itself. In this case, the state can add the resources we have if we figure that out together. That, again, going back to saving taxpayers money, is a really, really important part of this. Huge progress has been made. And the fact that we're not having a big discussion about any of that right now doesn't mean that no one cares. It means it's a progress that we've had.
Thank you, Member Rybeck. Why don't we, I want to make one more comment and then we'll open it up for the presentation. We've asked staff to provide a little more attention to a couple of the key investment opportunities that are included in this proposed capital budget. There is one, though, and this is the purpose of the amendment that is in your packet or proposed amendment. Soldiers Field there's what I would call a placeholder in the proposed budget. But the work is very much still occurring in the community to define what the vision is for this amazing asset on the southern end of the DMC zone. And so we want to recognize that this is a critical piece of community infrastructure and an incredible amenity that supports many of our goals. But we also want to recognize that it's very early, at least in our deliberations, since the plan is still being developed at the community level, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to review that community-based plan before we make a final investment decision. So with that little bit of context, we'll come back to that when we have the resolution at the end of this presentation and further discussion. But with that, I'll turn it over and welcome Cindy Steinhauser from the city, who is here, joining Catherine and Patrick for this presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So today we're going to review the capital and operating budgets, and we are going to advance a resolution, hopefully approve a resolution with respect to the funding. A few key takeaways I would like to just introduce with this. So the capital improvement budget, the physical projects, we could describe them in many ways, but one way to describe them are projects we're finishing. So projects that had been approved years ago that are in process and we're concluding, such as Discovery Walk. Projects that have been approved and are underway, like rapid transit. Projects that have been previously discussed and ready for action, such as Soldiers Field and 6th Street Bridge, which the mayor mentioned. And then we give some visibility to projects on the horizon that we're not asking you to take action on, but we want to introduce so that as we hear ideas and we know of things coming, give visibility to those things. In our work plan and operating budget, some highlights, we are adding capacity for business development and lead generation, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that. We are very much committed to advancing the board's expectations around equity, sustainability, affordability, community engagement, and health, and that's baked into our operating budget. And this operating budget also adds additional capacity to the city of Rochester. I think you know that we have a relationship with the city of Rochester whereby these DMC funds support a number of city staff. This budget adds additional capacity as we are entering into more of an execution phase. The timetable, so we are at September where it's under your consideration. Following action today, it'll go in front of Rochester City Council for their consideration. And ultimately, as you know, this is a term that Aaron Parrish developed, a yes and yes model, whereby this board first must take action, but only after the city council actually also adopts this budget, do we have a budget. We have a lens through which we look at all of the budget, and I won't go through all of this. You've seen it before, but to acknowledge that there is a filter, if you will, that we use to make recommendations to you. I often, in an attempt to simplify what our work is at DMC, divided into two categories, which is to guide the $585 million of public investment, and then to attract 5.6 billion of private investment. So it's really the two parts of what we do, the public infrastructure and attracting private investment. The next slide, none of you will be able to read probably, but you do have a hard copy in your packet, I think a fold out version, so you can see it more closely. We're not going to go through these line by line. Happy to do so if you have questions about any of them. But they are divided in the categories that we've used in the past: public realm, mobility, strategic redevelopment, and streets and sewers and operations. So those are the way we've organized the budget in prior years. Some of you have asked, and rightfully so, a map that shows the investment and where these investments are landing. And this is only reflects the investment in the proposed in the 2023 budget. In this way, you can begin to see the connectivity and the sort of systems approach that these investments are how they tie together. So I could pause here for a moment, Chair Wheelock, or we could dive into, and we're prepared to dive into one of those areas of investment, which is the riverfront, which we've talked about giving more visibility to one of the emerging projects. And so we're prepared to shift into that detail.
Member Campbell.
Patrick, I'd be interested in looking at the rapid transit numbers, and particularly the Second Street project. It looks like we're really going to start to spend money there next year and then following in 2024. When would we expect to see Second Street project completed?
We'll be having a little more detail on mobility later, but the second quarter of 2026.
2026.
Second quarter, yep.
Thank you. The only other comment that I would make, I'm just looking to see if there are other members in the presentation that you have on the spreadsheet. We also noted in our work group discussions that though we talk about it as the public realm, there are many aspects of those projects categorized under public realm that are also infrastructure, et cetera. So I just want to acknowledge that we use them for categorization purposes around our key goals, but it's not a detailed accounting for how much of the public funding is being invested in public infrastructure. So with that caveat, I think Member Ryback, you had a question or comment?
I was going to hold this for later, but I think with this map up here, I want us to look at Soldiers Field and Discovery Walk. I mean, I support very much what the chair just said about excitement about what the community comes up with in Soldiers Field. And, you know, my vantage point, at least, my job here is not to say to the community what should be on the river or Soldiers Field, but instead for us to enable whatever that is. But one huge thing that matters, and I know it's been a bit controversial, is Discovery Walk. Think about the Cleveland Clinic, a competitor. Okay, you cannot go to the Cleveland Clinic and then walk to a golf course, believe me. Okay, in this case, one of the huge advantages we have in this incredibly livable city is that if we have a green corridor that we are supporting that goes all the way to Soldiers Field, the community's vision can be dramatically more enabled. So I just want to say, I know it's been a little controversial, but Discovery Walk is about that huge advantage we have. The second thing very quickly is, are you going to touch on labs later, Patrick? Because I can hold this later.
On what? I'm sorry.
You referenced one of the projects you talked about for the future was laboratory.
Yeah, we
You're
are
gonna
going to.
Talk about, okay, I'll just hold it for that.
Yeah.
All right, well then, Patrick, I think we've teed this up, and before we take up any more of the comments that you probably want to make to us, why don't we let you go ahead and do the presentation?
Thank you. So
No, take it.
thank you. Thank you. And we welcome these questions in any sequence. We know we'll get to them. We did want to give some visibility to an important emerging project which relates to the riverfront. And I'm going to ask colleagues Catherine and Cindy to lead this presentation. And I think we're at an exciting moment. A year ago, we at this budget table, you acknowledged the importance of the river as a future amenity, authorized support for it. That led to a significant planning process, and take it from there, Catherine.
Great. Yes, so to remind you where we are on this project, this is the city-owned land on the east and the west side of the river. It's primarily parking with some vacant properties on it as well. Urban design firm Gamble and Associates and a community outreach team, NAO Partners, along with other partners, were selected in the fall of 2021 and did an extensive community engagement process followed by a conceptual design process. And this preferred plan was presented to City Council and approved 7-0 in July of 22. So just 2 months ago. And so with that, I am going to turn it to my colleague, Cindy Steinhauser, to walk us through.
Great, thank you. I really, again, want to just emphasize, I think I mentioned this before, every time I come before here, I'm so appreciative of the partnership we have with our colleagues at DMC and the shared vision that this board and the City Council have for really approaching systematically and intentionally the transformation of the DMC district and its benefits. So this process, Dr. Otley said earlier today, and it really struck with me, has been thoughtful and purposeful. Right. I think that's how we're approaching all of our work, thoughtful and purposeful. And as the slide describes, we really saw this as an opportunity to create a new front door for the city, one that was grounded in a co-design and community engagement process. So this is really truly a community plan, right? It builds and re-energizes open space. It connects to the river for the community in a way that they've not been able to connect to the river. And creating these spaces, as we know there's great case studies across the United States. When you create these kinds of spaces and you make the commitment to the design of these kinds of spaces, it creates a healthy community, both economically, socially, and environmentally. And that's really what we see in this plan. It's creating a spot for opportunities for additional commerce and fiscal growth, fiscal responsibility, as well as sustainability. Oh, there's your slide, Catherine. So the out of this process, again, it was a very robust co-design and community engagement process. We came up with these 5 core principles that really drove the plan. I won't read them, but as you can see, they really tried to think about it, a very layered and very intentional approach that talks about harmony of design, economic development, again, better connectivity. We really, early in our discussions, talked about this is the origin site, right? The origin of our community in terms of what occurred there many, many years ago when Rochester was founded, but the opportunity that it presents to connect to even greater spaces that are happening in our community, as you saw in the previous map from Patrick. Here's a very high level what the site plan of the plan. The eastern site, which is the 2 larger, can I point to this? 2 larger, it's not gonna let me, really presents a great opportunity. The two larger structures present a great opportunity for us to start to tackle the issue of affordable housing. And I would say I couch it with affordable housing and affordable living because of the connectivity to transportation, to the river, to green space, free open space, so there's that equity piece that the east side really presents. And then the west side is, I'm really excited about this site, not only because of all that's going on there from commerce and open space, but again, thinking about how we capitalize on the historic property that's there, the connection to the river in a way that's even more unique than perhaps the east site, and advancing that work and connecting back to the downtown over 3rd Street and the historic properties that whose back doors could be a new front door, thinking about how the space integrates. Yeah, so there are additional renderings in your packet. So as you can see, the entire campus is just under 6 acres, and the intentionality of this work led to recommending that not quite 50% of that really be dedicated to that open space, public realm activation of the space, which is really, really critical. Again, not only for building social equity in your community, but economic equity. Those are the drivers that really help launch exponentially better investment in your community. And so when we talk about recommended next steps, it's again, thinking about how we need to tackle this from a number of layers. These are transformational projects that don't happen overnight. It's this really, really critical early work that can set that path. So interim activation, that's a partnership not only with DMC, but RDA. I just returned from Columbus, Ohio, got the opportunity to go look at Columbus Commons. If you're not familiar with it, old mall in the heart of their downtown, and how they transformed it. And one thing when I was speaking to the director that she mentioned was build it, but also activate it. So critical. So we're appreciative of our partners helping us in that interim activation. The regulatory pieces, obviously the Corps of Engineer flood wall, the due diligence that we have to do on the financial components of the historic structures that are there, and our work with SHPO, continuing our conversations with the county and understanding their long-term needs as it relates to the structure that's on the east site, and how we look at positioning that site for redevelopment, and then preparing that site, in terms of analysis, environmental analysis, all readying us for developer solicitation by this time next year, and pointing towards the goal of reducing the risk for developers to be interested in this site, while still holding true to this big, bold vision that would not have been possible, again, without the partnership and your leadership, as well as the leadership of the City Council. And so with that, I think that's the last slide. Yep. There's questions, happy to try and answer them.
Madam Chair.
Member Williams?
So it's fabulous, and really glad to see this kind of elevating in the budget for this next year. Just curious, so will the city be doing some kind of RFP, RFQ for development sites eventually? I'm thinking particularly obviously about housing, and having that kind of integrated in, there's mixed use sites in here as well as the green space, but will that be part of that RFP or RFQ?
Yes, that is what we're marching towards by summer next year, is that we are in a position that we can do a developer solicitation, still determining whether or not that'll be a request for qualifications or an actual proposal or RFP process, but
Great.
Absolutely.
Member Carlson?
So I have other comments on the budget, but just in general, this idea of starting to really focus on the connectivity between projects and using the river corridor from Soldiers Field down through by the government center and really all the way from the city perspective to Silver Lake. It's just such an exciting time for our city and reimagining those spaces. The council was supportive of this small area plan. I think there was a little bit of skepticism on the front end, but with Gamble and Associates and the partners and the very deep community co-design process, they led our community through, I think that we landed in a very solid place. There was a lot of energy and excitement around the different purposes that this site will have and some of the creative design and how to not only have it as a front door to our downtown, but how to connect it to the existing assets in our historical district area. And so just a lot of enthusiasm and support for adopting this and thinking about how it will connect to all the other exciting work along the river corridor.
Member Campbell.
Well, I think this is one of the most exciting projects that I've heard about since the DNC was formed. 30 years ago, I was a bank president in Omaha, Nebraska, and we were involved in trying to revitalize downtown Omaha. And we had turned our backs to the Missouri River for half a century and realized that the Missouri River was actually a real asset. And we really needed to take a look at what we could do by opening up downtown. And if you look at what's happened to Omaha over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a new baseball stadium built right adjacent. There's a new huge public park. It's brought all kinds of redevelopment, housing. It's incredible. I guess the bottom line is we shouldn't try to recreate the wheel here by ourselves. It's been done in many other communities. And I think this is probably one of the most exciting things we'll ever deal with. So congratulations. And we're with you 100% on this one.
Well, thank you for this presentation. I would just say, Patrick, you probably can resonate with Member Campbell's comments, given your work for the city of St. Paul and the revitalization of the riverfront of the Mississippi that runs through it. I do think the addition of residential along the riverfront is a complete game changer, because that's what helps activate that riverfront year round. It's easier for the community to gather in warm weather months, but residents will be driving the use of that space year round. And this, I would agree, this is a very exciting opportunity, and we're thrilled that the city has endorsed unanimously the plan for this. And we are looking forward to partnering with the city, the county, and other parties for the execution on this amazing plan. So thank you for that.
Chair,
Patrick,
oh,
Member Carlson.
may I speak to the Soldiers Field request briefly, or that's not a good time?
I think we're going to get to that
Are we?
in just a little bit. So if I
Okay,
could,
I
I'll
will-
come back to you when we get to that item. Patrick?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the comments about the riverfront work. And again, the point in showing this now is that there's relatively modest amount requested in this year in 2023 budget related to the riverfront, but warming you up for something in the future.
So warmed.
So good.
We lock up here, Cody? So our next slide does introduce Soldiers Field. So Council President, you'll have your opportunity at this moment where we just identify the key projects in the budget related to public realms. So Discovery Walk, which is completion, Chateau Theater, where we continue to invest in that, the capital side of that, Soldiers Field improvements, and the riverfront, which we just talked about. So this, I think, would be a good moment to reflect on that, Council President.
Member Carlson.
Sure. So we had, was it last week? What day is it today? I think it was this week's study session.
It was Monday. It was Monday.
It was Monday. It feels like both a lifetime ago and all day, every day. So we had a study session on the Soldiers Field master plan. And there was also a public hearing from the Parks Board on Soldiers Field on Tuesday. So there's been quite a bit of engagement just this week from the council and people speaking from the public, and there are feelings all over the place. But again, we are using a very intentional, community-driven process to gather ideas and feedback and priorities of our community to best design that space. The council overall was excited and enthusiastic about DMC committing such significant resources, because it is, I think, maybe our top example so far of how DMC is investing in a very real accessible community asset and just demonstrates the value very clearly to our neighborhoods and our community residents who can hopefully take bus rapid transit or other forms of transportation into the center of the city to use that asset on top of visitors. So there was a lot of support for DMC investment. There's still, like Chair Wheelock mentioned, some fine tuning and tweaking I think that will happen before that plan is adopted. But in general, a lot of excitement about the proposed uses north of the golf course, which is the area that we're really talking about the investment in.
Thank you.
Chair Wheelock and Council President Carlson, would it be appropriate to anticipate at the November 10th meeting of DMCC that a more complete presentation of Soldiers Field would be ready? Do you know the schedule well enough? I'm sorry to.
No, I'm looking at my staff over there.
So there is a sequence going on. I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay.
In terms of the community conversation and the back and forth between city council and the park board. So I would expect by the November meeting of this board that there will be a more complete update to provide.
Yeah, that is one piece about this project that is different than some of the other projects we have been involved in supporting as DMC, as the Parks Board, as it's a park. Our Parks Board has an important role to play in approving the master plan as well.
Thank you. We do look forward to that presentation, and if it can happen at our November meeting, that would be great. Obviously, we want it to be complete, and we want the other critical parties to feel like they have reached conclusion on their work and not to rush it here and consider it prematurely. So if it needs to wait, so be it. But it is a significant budget item in this proposed next year budget. And we certainly want to make sure that the community understands that we are supportive of an investment, not only in this asset that is so critical to the community today, but these are, whether it's a river, whether it's a park system, oftentimes it's a community event venue. These are amenities that also attract investment opportunities and change the relationship that investors have with the possibility in the community, just as we're changing the investment perspective of the riverfront by advancing this plan. So we want to consider carefully how that weighs in with our investment, and we look forward to hearing more about what that proposed plan is that the community has developed. So Patrick, you have a couple more slides.
Yeah, so mobility we'll describe in greater depth, but it shows up in this budget as $17 million for the advancement of the construction, which begins in 2023. The next category is strategic development. These are funds to support private development, the infrastructure necessary for private development. And streets and sewers, the request from the city relates to beginning a new sewer project, as well as the early design or next step design with 6th Street Bridge. And the mayor referenced the fact that the city of Rochester is going to receive $19.9 million from federal government in support of the bridge, and will look to DMC for an additional $9 million to support the 6th Street Bridge. But the more detailed design, conceptual design has occurred, but more detailed design will be occurring in 2023.
Madam Chair, can I ask just a small detail?
Member Ryback?
Yeah, just a small detail on this. The piece of this about investment along the rapid transit corridor, does that apply to potential investment at the Transit Village?
Yes.
Okay.
And then just to put on the table in front of you, not for action and no request per se. Well, Riverfront we've talked about, which includes the 6th Street Bridge, the improvements to the Army Corps of Engineer flood wall that make it more accessible. So that's the significant design work we have going on. Member Ryback mentioned West Transit Village, other major development projects yet to be determined that aren't necessarily in front of us. Discovery Labs, and we'll talk more about that in a bit, but this idea of building additional life science infrastructure that makes Rochester more attractive, wayfinding and neighborhood connectivity. So as we build a bus rapid transit line, for example, reaching in and sort of penetrating into neighborhoods and communities so that it's more intuitive how to access the line, more friendly to access the line. Smart city digital infrastructure, heart of the city phase 2, which is the idea of continuing the heart of the city to the front door of Mayo Civic Center or to the front door of Gonda. Discussion about downtown facilities for bikers, for community members, for bathrooms and showers associated with the public spaces in the downtown. Opportunities associated with Mayo Clinic's 5-year capital plan, remembering that our role in part is to ensure that we provide support for Mayo's growth, not to Mayo, but for the growth associated with it. And then energy infrastructure such as district energy and EV charging and the like.
Could I ask a question?
Member Campbell?
I hate to go back to the project on Second Street reconstruction again, but yeah, I'd be very interested in getting a more detailed plan of what that project is going to look like, and how much of a problem it'll create for businesses along Second Street. There are many residences like Ronald McDonald House for patients that are come to Rochester. Their people are moving from St. Mary's downtown. I don't need to have this at a meeting, but it would really be, I think, helpful for all of us to understand the details and the complexity of that construction project and the impact it's going to have on this community for 2 or 3 years.
Patrick, can you supplement that in the form of a communication to the board members before our next meeting? And I assume that you're adopting the same kind of efforts to minimize business disruption that we are in some of our other public projects. But is there a quick response that you want to offer now?
Sure, Member Campbell, we are building out that construction timetable as it's part of the bus rapid transit. So when we refer to Second Street reconstruction, it relates to the link rapid transit. And so we are building out the sequencing and timing associated with how to stage that, and certainly very mindful of the impacts it'll have along the corridor for individual businesses and properties. So we will happily provide that detail so that you're more familiar with it. So, Madam Chair, just a graphic to show sort of the alignment with what was originally recently adopted by this board and how we are aligning, adopted as a budget framework by this board and how we are aligning with it. I think in light of time, it might be important to move to the operating budget.
Agreed.
So with that, and Mike, I'll invite you to join here. With that, the operating budget, which is part of the budget we're asking you to approve today, includes DMCC corporate expenses that's associated with this board, DMC operating budget, City of Rochester administrative costs, and city project managers that are funded by DMCC. We have statutorily a set of responsibilities that are outlined in the law, but we thought it would be important to give visibility for one new programmatic initiative that we are, I'll give this to Mike, one new programmatic initiative that we have been embellishing, I guess, as we've hired new staff and begun more seriously committing to our business recruitment and lead generation. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Mike Flynn, who is our Senior Director of Business Development, and invite him to provide a little bit more detail about that body of work.
Thank you. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Good morning. So maybe just as a sort of a little bit of a look back, I started in this role about a year ago and have spent the bulk of that time trying to evaluate candidly where this community sits and where the DMC sits sort of in the broader economic development landscape, so we could figure out where we need to be focusing our effort. And so to that end, I've put together sort of a perspective on kind of what I feel like I've seen and what I think we need to do next. So apologize if this seems overly basic, but I think it's helpful to sort of walk through the process. So the goal of any economic development initiative is to make money, is to generate revenue for the community or the region in which you're working. And that is no different here. What is a little bit different is in terms of what we're going to do. So if the end goal on the right there is new tax revenue, you sort of start that process by trying to build a better product, by trying to develop your community and to build the assets and to build the infrastructure and develop the real estate and all of those things that a company that is looking to make an investment is going to find important. And I feel that that's one of the things that DMC has done tremendously well, is to focus on what are the things we need to have here as a community to make somebody to want to make an investment. Typically, once you get that community developed, you go through a process of trying to evaluate, what do people think of us? What does a typical customer think of this market? Who do we compete with? Where do we win a deal? Where do we lose a deal? All those types of things. Once you have that understanding of where you as a community reside in sort of the consciousness of an investing business, you go out and start to try and generate awareness with those audiences. For us, that's going to be corporate real estate. That's going to be high growth, biotech, life science, some specific disciplines inside of life science. But we want to make those companies that are trying to figure out where do we put facilities and equipment and people, we want to make them aware of what we have to offer. If we do that well, and if we do that consistently enough, ultimately we're going to start to generate what I would call deal flow, corporate recruitment deal flow. Companies that are trying to figure out where to put an investment are going to start to call us. And that phone maybe rings once a month, and then it rings twice a month, and then it rings a couple times a week with people looking to make an investment. And when that point in time comes, we will start to have to generate capacity as an organization to manage that deal flow. So you need project managers, and you need research people, and you need the capability to answer all the questions those companies are going to have. And as we get better at that, and as we start to understand that process better as an organization, we'll start to win those projects, which in time will generate jobs and all of those things. So again, this might seem sort of rudimentary, but I think it's important to step through. I've done this for 20 years. I've done this in big markets and little markets. I've done this in markets that have been at it for 50 years and markets that have not. And it's universal. This is the process of corporate recruitment from an economic development perspective. So understanding this is how it works, over the last year, I've been trying to figure out where we're at. And my opinion, having done this for a long time and worked deals of all shapes and sizes, is we're somewhere in front of letting the world know that we are an opportunity from an investment standpoint. And I'm basing that on the fact that there's not a tremendous amount of deal flow. One of the things I evaluated when I got here is what do we have in the pipeline? What's coming in on a regular basis? I made a point over the first 100 days to call 100 people I'd done business with in the past 20 years to try and figure out, had any of them worked a project here, or had they seen us, had they heard of us? And that level of awareness is pretty low. And so from the standpoint of building a program and the standpoint of coming to you and saying, this is where I think we need to spend money, at this point in time, it's less on managing deal flow and it's more on doing things that generate that deal flow. So I don't know if this is helpful or not, but wanting to let you know sort of how I've evaluated and gotten to the point today to sort of ask for this specific program.
Madam Chair.
Member Ryback.
2 points that I take out of this. One is that from what we need to do as a board in evaluating this work and what the public needs to do is to recognize that there is, much like a tree, it's sleep, creep, leap, that this is about putting the roots down right now. So we're not expecting huge numbers of deals right now, and we're going to have to invest in obviously that next awareness area. It's also something that I think we need to keep our eye on about how staffing this initiative works, that it looks like when we get into that tan, khaki, whatever color deal flow area, that may require us to think more about all of that. Is that generally when we're thinking about, we should in short term be paying for marketing now and be looking at staffing in the next couple of years.
I have absolutely, and I think this slide is reflective of that. So from the standpoint of where are we spending resource, where are we spending dollars in the next year? There's sort of four big buckets in terms of building a program you can put money into. And the majority of what I'm recommending and asking for is on that awareness building end of it, because it doesn't make sense for us to staff a team of project managers and researchers because we don't have the activity that they're going to sit and twiddle their thumbs a lot. What we need right now is people to be out on the road, people to be in front of customers, people to be bumping into them at different functions, different events, launching a digital marketing campaign, building a digital presence sort of generally, and pushing that information out so that the goal is, once a year, a company will sit in a boardroom and talk about their footprint. Where are we at? Are we in the right places? Do we have too much space? We have a lease coming due. There's all these inflection moments. And the goal for us as an organization, when that inflection moment happens, for somebody to raise their hand and say, we should take a look at Rochester. We're going to be in Boston and we're going to be in RTP and we're going to be in these other places, but I know there's things going on in Rochester and we should take a look there. And we do that by getting in front of them a lot with a consistent message that we know sort of hits the targets that they're interested in, and just pounding that drum repeatedly. We have to get smarter about what those messages are, and we have to get smarter about what they think about us currently, what parts of that are right and what parts are wrong, and what do we need to change. But once we have that research done, it is just a matter of getting in front of them and pounding a message over and over so that when those inflection points happen in their business, they think to call us.
And just to clarify, or to elaborate on Member Ryback's point, in year 3, in year 5, in year 10, those percentages would then change as you have awareness built and more deals coming in.
Yes, and it should become a much more balanced program where we have a team of people generating deals, a team of people managing deals. We have people that are sort of out doing broad-based marketing. We have people that are doing very targeted one-to-one marketing. Again, if we want to run this program sort of as contemporary markets do, that would be sort of how it looks. Now, I think the other thing to be very upfront about is there's a lot of different ways to structure an economic development program. There are organizations that work in just one or two of these buckets, and they either leave the other buckets up to the market, or they have other organizations that fulfill some of those functions. So this is not the only way to do it, but I think given the resource we have here and sort of given what that landscape looks like, I think a balanced approach makes sense to get to over time.
Madam Chair.
Member Williams?
Just I think one, I'm really, again, pleased in the context of the budget to see a bigger commitment to this. It's interesting because I juxtapose this against the fact that, DMC exists largely, if we build it, they will come, right? We are building it, we are putting in infrastructure and making sure that when folks come, right, we will have the buildings, public spaces, culture, community that would welcome them. So it's good to see the two parts of the model kind of moving forward. So all in favor of the work.
Why don't you proceed?
Excellent. So understanding this is how we sort of want to allocate staff time and resource in the next year, and understanding that in future years, if this works well, we'll see those percentages start to shift to a more balanced approach. The question is, so what does this look like from a tactical standpoint? And for, I think, the next year, this is what this looks like. This is a job that takes place outside of Rochester by and large, because our customers for this effort are outside of Rochester. This is not an endeavor that's designed to get the company that's here to continue to invest here. That work is going to happen. That work is important, but that's not what the focus of this is. The focus of this is, let's figure out who are the people that have the ability to make an investment, and let's get in front of them early. Let's get in front of them with a value proposition that we know is going to resonate before we ever step into that room. Let's deliver it well, and let's do that repeatedly so that these companies, whether it's a cell and gene therapy company, whether it's a device company at AdvaMed, whether it's lead gen we do in Boston or San Diego or RTP, whether it is a recruitment focused website that we push out to the market, collateral that we build, the list of things is significant. And one of the things we'll do is, in this first couple of years, we're going to try a lot of different things. We're going to figure out where does the return come greatest in terms of our spend, and over time you'll see the program shift to things that we know produce a return. I'm not interested in doing this for the sake of doing this. We want to pay attention to where deals coming from, where's interest coming from, so that we can put more money in those places going forward. So this is what year one of the program looks like. I think next year when we're back here, I would encourage you to ask, what are we doing different? What are we doing more of? What did we get rid of? And we should have good answers to those questions with sort of a year of activity under our belt.
Member Campbell.
During the budgeting process, some of us asked very specific questions, Patrick and Mike, about their plans for the coming year. And since those meetings, we've had some separate meetings with Mike to dig into the detail. And I'm sort of torn a bit. I recognize you don't make the sale on the first call, so we're going to have patience that we won't see success overnight. But at the same time, I think this board needs to keep the pressure on you to produce results. And it's going to be that tension between having patience and expecting results that's really important. The only thing I'm concerned about is I think you must create collaboration with Mayo. I see you have Mortensen and Deed and Medical Alley. I don't see Greater MSP on here. I think they need to be added. I want to make darn sure that you're collaborating with the right parties to produce the kind of leverage that we need to produce success. It's if you do it as a silo, it's not going to work. You're going to, and if it means that some of us at this table need to help you get things done, we're more than prepared to roll up our sleeves and help you. But to me, the only way this is going to work if you team with the right resources to make us more competitive than the other places around the country, around the world.
I agree entirely. There's sort of a universal truth in this type of economic development that you want to make yourself as big as possible. And so for us, that does mean parachuting in behind the governor's office or Greater MSP or Medical Alley. And what I would say is in the year we've been here, the majority of the work we've done in trying to figure out what this program looks like has been in partnership with those organizations. There's a lot of things in flux at some of those organizations as well. And so we're trying to figure out what that relationship looks like. But I've gotten to know Peter and Amanda at Greater MSP really well. And I think we are very much in sync. I think they view us as an extension of them, and the inverse of that is true. A lot of what we've done this year has been with Deed and some of their new business marketing staff. I know they're trying to figure out how to make a program bigger. How can what we're doing sort of complement what they're doing? And again, how does that work both ways? So I agree entirely. A lot of it is trying to leverage budgets. If we can go into things together, we can make a bigger splash sometimes, but I could not agree more with sort of that sentiment.
Member Ryback.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Member Campbell for doing a lot of work outside of the meeting and now playing back for us some of that. And I think he's asking this really good question about how do we play our role of supporting long-term work and measuring that. And so I just want to encourage you to think about math class, show your work. That isn't to catch up on it. I think what we really need to think about is a more enhanced feedback loop where you're giving us knowledge about what's going on and what are the assets and what are the challenges that we can react to, which takes time. And so that earlier point I wanted to make about labs that I was going to delay until later, I want to pull in here now. When people are coming here, they're coming here in large part because Mayo is here. And Mayo has facilities, and that is a phenomenal thing. But I think I want you to keep your ears open to what laboratory facilities that would not be available at Mayo are needed here that are also potentially not in what's already in Discovery Square. Meaning, I would strongly support the idea of saying that public laboratory or common laboratory facilities should be part of the infrastructure we're looking at here. If we see that XYZ type of lab, and I have no idea what it would be, is popping up as something that would help nurture different types of businesses, that would be great. I think we should really look long-term too at the idea that if the public is investing in laboratory space, there should be common use. So a business that you may not even know about would grow or something here and have it be certainly supporting the whole infrastructure we have with healthcare, but not necessarily dependent on Mayo.
So Patrick, I'm going to suggest that we think about adding regular updates to our agenda. And I think this is an area of interest for many of our board members, and we hope to see the fruition of that private investment after the public infrastructure investment, and we want to keep tabs on that. I want to be mindful of time. I'd like to see if we can finish up the budget section. I particularly want to make sure we don't shortchange the housing discussion on our agenda.
Absolutely. So if you're prepared, Madam Chair, just a reminder, the key takeaways, of the capital budget and the operating budget. And there is something referred to as the working capital loans that Kayla Brennan can describe if necessary, but this is really provides cash flow management between entities. And with that, we are prepared for any additional questions or comments.
Members, why don't we proceed to getting at least a motion on the resolution to approve this budget? And that's item C, moved and seconded. Item C, page 123. So the resolution has been moved and seconded, and I'm going to turn to my colleague on my right, Commissioner Tyne, about the amendment for Soldiers Field that we had discussed, just to make it clear that this is still under discussion in the community and that we would need to consider this in more detail before making a decision about how much of the proposed available $10 million might be invested in this initiative. There, Member Tyne, do you want to make a motion to amend?
So I'm going to make a motion to amend the DMCC budget to add a paragraph number 2 in front of you for the Soldiers Field Memorial Project, recognizing that community planning efforts are at a preliminary stage and will shape the project scope and funding need. Further detail and information as to public realm plans and proposed funding shall be presented to the DMCC for specific approval of the project plan and costs.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
And Madam Chair, we should clarify, I believe Member Campbell made the initial motion. Is this satisfactory from your perspective? This change in the motion?
Yes.
A quick point of discussion, just to be very clear, I'm not sure this was mentioned, but DMC would not be fully funding the Soldiers Field master plan.
Correct.
We
Thank
have
you.
federal funding, would have some local dollars to put towards this. So this would be a braided shared funding approach.
Thank you, Member Carlson, for that clarification. Yes, we would be one of many funders. All right, there's a motion before us as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And I just want to call out, I don't believe Member Norton is still able to be on the phone with us, but I have violated your advice already by not doing a roll call vote. So I'm going to continue to move forward. I believe she had to go back to her other meeting. So thank you for that. Patrick, why don't we do the next updates in the amount of time that allows, and then move to the housing presentation?
Yes, thank you. We've reconnoitered here with staff about more quickly walking through the updates so that we can invite the group forward on the housing presentation. So turn to my colleague, Jamie Rothy, who has led our work with Heart of the City. Jamie.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm here to provide a quick update with Heart of the City. So we'll move through that. Today's update will include a project update, community response so far to the Heart of the City project, our business response, some community critiques, which we want to highlight, our key lessons learned, and where we're at with our post-occupancy analysis. So if you were to step outside today, you'll see a mostly completed Heart of the City. We're just waiting for a few final pieces. And that next piece to be finalized is the catenary light system. We're anticipating that to be installed beginning October 10th. So those 50-foot poles that'll be put into place. And then we're continuing to evaluate the performance and making sure it's meeting our standards in the space. So it's constantly being looked at as different people are using it and walking through the area. We also wanted to highlight community response. It's been so great to see a whole season, summer season so far, of the space being used. And this includes the activation of the Chateau as well. They're doing programming inside and out. Daily programming is happening on the plaza. So we're seeing music, shows and performances being activated on the plaza. We partnered with the Rochester Downtown Alliance to invest in some startup grants for different people to use the space as well and to explore how they could use it. And then there's a lot of active organic activation happening on the plaza as well, just people meeting up and having a jam session or doing art. So it's really fun to see all of those pieces start to come together. We've seen a great business response as well, return to businesses to the Peace Plaza. So Mocha has opened, Primp has come back. We also have new businesses happening since the Peace Plaza has been completed or through its completion, including a new popcorn business that just recently made its announcement, which you see on the right. Community critiques happen, and it's totally normal, as I'm sure you are all aware of, and important for us to listen to. Some of those have been lack of green space. You may recall that we did remove the grass that was there and replaced it with some different infrastructure. The raised lettering is another critique. Wakefield, a good critique probably is public restrooms as well, with it being so activated. Many people are looking for places to use the bathroom. We've seen some critiques of cost and tree locations as well. So we continue to gather that information. We'll use that as we continue to look at this space. We also wanted to share with you key lessons learned. There are 3 significant pieces that we think are really important to the success of this project. Business forward is something that we've talked a couple of times with this group about, and also recently came up, I think, in discussion with the BRT. Putting in and working with our businesses along those areas to build this business forward strategy is critical. Their partnership, the information that we gather, helps to inform the construction process. It helps inform how they want to be communicated to and how we work with them throughout the process. And it also allows us to activate the space as well throughout the entire construction process. And all of these 3 things together made for a really successful project. Community input is key. We did this project before the community co-design process was created, but we did have a significant amount of community engagement during design, but then we also brought together a group of stakeholders to help inform the design. And then the project life cycle is another big key lessons learned. I think it's important for us to remember that these projects have a really long life cycle. The Heart of the City project started in 2016, and you think we're delivering it on in 2022. So it means lots of change, city council change, leadership change, business change. We just need to take that into consideration as we're building these projects, as we're maintaining relationships and building new throughout the entire project. And then the last piece I wanted to provide an update on is the post-occupancy analysis. It's really a public life health check. The last time I was here, I shared with you that we were in negotiation with GEL. They are actually here on site this week, out on the plaza, gathering information, observing, doing intercept interviews, and other ways of gathering information. And then we'll see the results and analysis of that information back in October. And that is what I have to say. Thank you.
Why don't we continue and then we'll see if we have questions at the end. So
Great.
Amy, why don't you
Mike,
stay at
do
the
you
table?
prepared to cover for Chris here?
Want to give a quick update on Discovery Square, and I think this will touch on some of the thoughts you had about shared lab space. So we've talked a lot about Discovery Walk. Construction of phase 1, if you drive past there, is well underway. To the point Jamie just made about the importance of business forward, we had a community big dig event this last weekend that I think everybody that attended was blown away by in terms of the engagement and the participation, and it really represents sort of in a very micro scale what that facility can be long term, and was very excited for everybody who was part of that. So that project continues to move forward. From an economic development perspective, you see a lot of cranes in that part of town. Those are primarily attached to the Kellen building. Topping out ceremony is going to be, I just received an email about it the other day, so that is forthcoming. Parking ramp construction continues to move forward. We had a company up on the 5th floor the other day and looking out that direction. They're making significant progress. First announcement in 2 Discovery Square, National Resilience. You maybe saw a press release on that. A partner of Mayo Clinic is going to be opening up an operation there. I actually am leaving this meeting right at noon to go take another company to walk through there. We've had a Zoom call last week with another holding company that has investments in a number of different biotech companies that is interested in taking space there. So I think activity, it is we're sort of at the front end of that, but it is definitely starting to pick up quite a bit. And some of the lead generation work we're doing specifically around regenerative medicine, advanced diagnostics is really focused on dumping more opportunities sort of into that pipeline. Business recruitment and infrastructure development. So we talk a lot about this idea of shared space, shared wet lab space, community infrastructure. What does that look like? And I think what we have learned in talking to industry and talking to the real estate community is the need for and the demand for this type of asset sort of globally, and what we could do here locally in Rochester to capitalize on a lot of that need. So Chris Shad, who Patrick mentioned, has been doing a lot of work over the last few months of trying to sort of frame out this problem, and is going to spend a lot of time in 2023 sort of building that business plan for what does this look like. So you know, we use some of these terms and they mean everything and they mean nothing at the same time. So when we talk about shared space, or we talk about laboratory space, maker space, what are we exactly talking about? Because there's a lot of different applications. I think one of the things we need to do as an organization is figure out what this means for Rochester. When we talk about shared services in a wet lab environment, what does that mean? Is that equipment? Is that a third party that manages some of those services, or that provides some of those services? How does it complement what already exists in this market? A lot of that work has to be done. We know it probably takes the form of shared lab space with some associated services, takes the form of a maker space where you can maybe have a central organization purchase expensive equipment that then different entities can sort of rent time on or have access to. And really, from a workforce development standpoint, we know the value that a simulation lab could provide, not only companies that are going to be tenants in 1 and 2 Discovery Square, but the Mayo Clinic, other institutions in the community that have a need for that type of talent. We know the unemployment rate is sub 2%. We know organizations are moving further and further into, you know, it used to be let's get them when they're in college, and then it was let's get them when they're in high school, and now it's how do we talk to them when they're in middle school? You can only squeeze that pipeline so far, and we think a simulation lab can provide some relief in terms of getting people through those programs in a shorter time frame, having them come out and be more productive employees day one. So we know that's an asset in terms of this broader economic development program we're trying to build that is important. So it is, you know, this could be a center part of our business recruitment strategy. Having these assets is probably not the beginning and the end, but it's a lot of it in terms of being able to go out. I know we're trying to get through this quickly, but I had some data the other day. The type of space this represents in other markets, A, you can't find it, and B, you can't afford to build it anymore. We're talking, you know, $1,500, $2,000 a foot construction costs, and then the rents you need on top of that. Certain companies are just priced out of this market. And I think what we have the ability here in Rochester to do is to build these assets and to wrap around these services in a way that it becomes really a big part of our value proposition. So I think it's really hard to sort of overstate how important this is. So the wet labs infrastructure, again, we know it's shared lab space where you can take a bench, or you can even share a bench with another company. You might be able to take 500 feet, maybe it ramps up to 1,500 feet. We know there's shared equipment. We're trying to figure out right now, what does that mean exactly? From an operation standpoint, do you need somebody on site to manage that? Is it, you know, just what does that business model look like? There's a lot of detail that has to be flushed out. Chris was with Medical Alley up in Montreal a couple of weeks ago as part of an initiative they were running, had ability to benchmark some of these facilities there. And Biotech City, which is a very well-respected, similar concept in Quebec, you know, it is critical if we want to be in this business. There's really almost no other way to do it. Makerspace, again, a lot of the same questions. What does this mean from a tactical standpoint? How does the operation work? There's a lot of examples of these nationally. Unfortunately, there may be not a lot of good examples. They tend to start and stop and go into business and go out of business. So trying to figure out that business model, I think, is a critical part of this. We know this is a huge community asset when it's done correctly. So not only for tenants of the building or researchers or scientists, but, you know, the 3D printer club or the high school physics lab that needs access to some of this equipment that doesn't currently exist. So there's a way, when done correctly, that this is not only a business asset, but really a significant community asset. And then the simulation lab, which again, from a workforce development standpoint, I think can be a critical tool for us to get as much as possible out of the talent that we have here. How do we get them better trained, quicker, have them be productive employees in a shorter timeline? We know this is a tool that works in other markets. We know it's a tool that works in this market, frankly. It's just there's not enough capacity. So building that capacity,
I'll
I
have
think,
you
is a
pause there for a
big
second.
part of this. Sure.
So maybe just in light of time, we'll pause at these three examples and let you know that our work plan next year is all about building the understanding the market demand, understanding potential partners, the business model. How do these actually work? These are likely independent initiatives, but relate from our point of view, very related and necessary, but maybe project leads that are not ourselves and that they're different from each other. And our job really is to help support them and help navigate that. So that's how we're approaching that.
Thank you. Should we move on to mobility?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just quick question, or just comment, actually, two quick comments. One, on the workforce front, I'm assuming that you identified Winona State up there. I'm assuming that U of M community college system are partners in that. They should be big drivers of that kind of workforce preparation. So it's just a comment more than anything. And then secondly, I'm assuming that the developers of Discovery Square One are, to Jim's earlier point about collaborators and going out and finding businesses. And I'm assuming that the developers themselves are also one of those collaborators, right?
Yes,
in reaching out. Mortensen, I saw Knutson, maybe that's just a construction company.
Yeah.
But those developers, I'm assuming, are full partners in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So briefly, mobility update. We've already kind of discussed the big milestones, as Chair Wheelock mentioned at the opening of the meeting, so I won't repeat those here.
Actually, I think it's important to pause and say the relationship between the city and Mayo Clinic on the operating agreement for the BRT is really a tremendous, significant milestone that took a lot of work between both parties to land at a place where they were comfortable for a 20-year contract to provide operating basically all of the local operating resources for the BRT are coming from Mayo Clinic, well, allowing for a fare-free system. So
this agreement is the envy of every other community that's vying for funds, I'm sure.
Yes, huge achievement, and I really thank our partners at Mayo and the city for all of their work in getting that completed. So looking ahead, we're in the midst of a public art component to the project. That's always an exciting and fun part of it. There are key state and federal environmental reviews and risk assessments that are happening in 2023. We're aiming to finalize the vehicle design and place that order by the end of the year. And then construction will also start in Q4 2023 for that opening day of Q2 2026. But the BRT is not the only mobility initiative going on. Obviously, it's part of a system. We've already talked about the 6th Street Bridge, where their city is also hiring an active transportation coordinator to really be the what we call the human infrastructure piece of this, helping people to understand what it takes to mode shift and encouraging that mode shift to happen. There's a draft active transportation plan that is getting finalized as well that the city has been running. Downtown sidewalk enhancements are underway, you've probably seen. And while our car has left Rochester, Turo has entered the market. So vehicle sharing is also an important part of the mobility strategy. The other main component is the West Transit Village. A brief update on that is that NTH has been selected by Mayo to run in collaboration with them a developer selection process for the property. That will be soft outreach is beginning basically as we speak today, tomorrow, and hopefully getting the prospectus out to developers starting early next week. It will be a 2-step process, a request for qualifications that would then become a short list with then a request for proposals and aiming to get to an MOU early next year. So that's the overall timeline there.
Any questions on any of those update items, Member Rybeck?
I wanted to underscore what Patrick said. This is a huge deal to have Mayo agreeing to this 20 years. It's not about Mayo and DMC, it's about the rest of the people in the community, in my mind, because what this means is that there's going to be an ongoing multi-hour, I don't know if it's 24 hours, but in all the different times people are working at Mayo. Is it 24 hours, Madam Chair?
No, it is not, but it's extended beyond what it is today, 18 hours.
Yeah, so 18 hours of operating means that people who are living on the other side of 52 are going to have far enhanced service into the core than they could ever be before. And if you really, and I'm sure many of you have sort of walked or driven or biked that area, there's a really growing group of businesses right before 52 and on the other side.
Right.
So when you look at all of this, it's not building a transit system for Mayo, it's Mayo funding a transit system for the rest of the area. And that I think is really, really helpful. It serves Mayo's purpose. It's a good deal for Mayo, but it's a good deal for the community. The point I think that is going to be most important for us is to recognize this RFP process is really important. And I want to strongly encourage Mayo and the city and all of us to look for a developer with the creativity to not just plunk a parking ramp on a block of land. That if you think about one group of people at rush hour coming out of one space, it's going to be a big gridlock. If you think about someone smart enough to locate the parking next to the housing so that it can be used for two purposes and all of that, that's what a quality developer can do. So I think this is only possible because Mayo has agreed to that and agreed to this agreement, and because we've really pushed hard to not just build parking ramps, but villages.
Thank you, Member Redback. All right. Thank you, presenters. We appreciate those updates, and we'll move on to our housing discussion.
Thank you. As Kevin Bright approaches the table, Director of Housing and Sustainability for DMC EDA, and Joe Marie. Yeah, of course. And Joe Marie from the Housing Coalition. I will let Kevin kick off this presentation, just reminding you that you have asked us to collaborate in the community in providing support to the community in addressing the important infrastructure need in our community, which is housing. And so this is both reflected in level of responsibility and commitment that has been assigned to Kevin and his role in developing partnerships with the county and the city and Housing Coalition and many others. So Kevin.
Well, thanks. Good morning. Happy to be here. I'm also joined by Taryn Edens from the city of Rochester and Dave Dunn on Zoom. So I think hopefully they can hear us and we can hear them too. They're primarily here to answer questions today, and the primary presenters are here. So thanks, Joe Marie, for being here as well. So the purpose of today is really just to provide an update on the communities and DMC EDA's housing progress. Kind of the quick agenda is a refresh on the community housing needs that Joe Marie will lead us through, as well as a community housing strategy update. And then I'll take on providing some of the progress on the DMC EDA housing work plan. So go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
So, Madam Chair, members, really appreciate the time today. I really appreciate the DMC's participation in this important work with the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing. One of the recent surveys that was done both in Olmsted County and city highlight that one of the priorities and one of the biggest concerns for our community is around housing. For the county, number one was access to housing, and number three was homelessness. And the city survey also had similar findings, and the concern around housing was much higher than similarly situated cities from across the nation. So we know that this issue is top of mind for our community and really in the hearts and minds of our community here. So 2 years ago, Maxfield did a study for updating the Olmsted County housing needs assessment. That study found that by 2030 that we needed, over 18,000 more housing units in Olmsted County, almost 15,000 housing units in the city, and almost 4,000 of those in downtown. And we've got a long way to go. The other thing that the housing assessment did for us was really help the coalition focus on, okay, what are the priorities? What are our gaps here in the community, and how can we be most impactful? And one of the things that's been really exciting to see at the coalition is the move towards these priorities in really figuring out, instead of having this coalition where there's kind of ad hoc decisions around what's going to happen in housing in the community, it's more focused now around what are these priorities in the community. And these were the priorities that were really identified in the Maxfield study. And I couldn't agree with Mr. Campbell's comment earlier more about really to move the needle on anything, whether it be affordable housing or anything. We really need to get away from silos, and we really need to have this collaboration, non-sector or cross-sector collaboration to make some of these things happen. And so the 5 priorities that were identified by the coalition were to create new homeownership opportunities, to help increase the home ownership of people of color. We know that in Minnesota, we have one of the largest gaps in the country, and we need to move towards correcting that. To create housing for those residents that have 50% or below AMI, to increase the options for our seniors in the community for housing. And then also, you know, how do we preserve the affordable housing that we already have in our community? So the coalition is really focusing on these 5 priorities and has recently adopted some key performance indicators around these priorities, both for the coalition itself and for the larger community. So what have we done around these priorities so far? $2 million of the coalition funding was put towards the Community Land Trust. As many of you know, First Homes, which has been very successful here in our community, indicates that there were, we added 8 additional homes already, but actually as of, I think yesterday, that number is already 10. So that is moving very quickly. And the great thing about, of course, the Community Land Trust is that those homes remain affordable in perpetuity for our community. And they're really a great first stepping stone for home ownership. We are launching next week the community co-design project around BIPOC home ownership. Really excited about that project. And I can tell you that Kevin Bright and Wafa Al Khalifa from DMC have been invaluable in helping us launch this. Wafa is going to be one of the facilitators of that work. And what we're hoping is to have recommendations that are further going to inform those KPIs that we've established so that we can build them out even further in regards to our BIPOC homeownership initiative. For enhancing senior housing options, last year we did a community co-design project around senior housing. What were the amenities that our seniors in the communities are looking for? And recently the coalition issued an RFP, really trying to incorporate those amenities that we heard from our community seniors that they really want and need. So that work is moving forward. One thing that is disappointing that I do have to share, and many of you are probably aware of this, is but one of the great things that the coalition contributed to was this, again, this great collaborative work around launching a senior housing project for low-income seniors. And our Olmsted County HRA was pivotal in doing that work. It was their first kind of in-house project. The county donated the land for that project. The city waived a significant amount of fees. There was just all in for that project. But unfortunately, because there was no special session, the county recently found out that that project for the 36, low-income senior housing, including would have been some high priority homeless units, is not going to be moving forward through at least the low-income housing tax credit project. Of course, we're going to do everything we can to continue to put the gas to the pedal to make that work. But, it's just really disheartening because it's a great project. And it was a great collaborative effort that is going to continue to move forward. We have recently invested in a couple of multifamily, both workforce, essentially housing and affordable housing projects that have increased since 2020, additional 103 units with another 175 units that are waiting, but in queue. And then for our preservation, we have recently worked with some consultants that are helping advise us as to a strategy to move forward in relation to preserving our naturally occurring affordable housing. And we'll be making some decisions regarding that soon and recommendations for policymakers. So the coalition has really moved forward quickly with these priorities and really trying to capture the data around that. Our next step really is, once we really solidify these KPIs and receive this additional information. We also have an RFP that just recently went out around looking at financial and policy tools, both around the country and what we can do more in our community in Southeast Minnesota to advance the work of the coalition. That RFP recently went out. We'll be making a decision on that. As soon as we get that data back as well, the plan is then to set some aspirational but very concrete goals around each of these priorities and the KPIs so that we can really start tracking where have we been and where are we going.
Thank you. Kevin?
Now we're going to change gears a little bit and focus a little bit more on the DMC EDA housing work plan. So some of the data that Joe just shared too was kind of on the community level, city level. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit more to the downtown housing needs. Thanks. So the downtown housing unit demand is kind of shown in that nesting graphic on an earlier slide, was around 4,000 units. And this is the rough breakdown of the needs of those 4,000 between senior housing, affordable housing, and market rate. One thing I just wanted to make clear that within these numbers, there's also ownership counts included in this, as well as varying levels of affordability for senior housing and affordable and subsidized units too. So I didn't want to burden everybody with all of that data, so I tried to make it as clear as possible here. We also wanted to introduce this concept of housing as infrastructure. You've heard a lot about different projects already today, public realm projects, transportation, and how they are connected. And we see housing as a very important piece of this overall picture in order to make downtown an area where people can live affordably and ideally in the future without a car too. So some of the reasons that we're bullish on this concept is creating more living opportunities regardless of income. We see very important in order to create more vibrancy and neighborhood vitality downtown. Supply and diversification we see as a talent attractor just in general. Having housing that people can move into immediately and that is affordable is something that will make Mike's job easier, as well as others in the community and economic development. We see more people living downtown as being able to support some of the other infrastructure that we've already talked about too, whether it be the transit system along 2nd Street or the more residents that we have downtown, the more user base that we have available to help recruit various retail, dining, and entertainment options in the future as well. So we see this as a pretty important piece of the puzzle. A little bit of progress on how we're working towards our goals. I apologize for some of the text on the side here. But the Maxfield report was completed in Q2 of 2020. So we're trying to show progress against the 4,000 units since the completion of that report. So you'll see primarily the progress is in the affordable rental and market rate rental. We're actively working and seeking opportunities for multifamily ownership opportunities downtown, as well as single family opportunities. As well, and the subsidized rental, the 30% AMI and below is a really difficult threshold to get to, but something we're committed to with our partners as well to figure out a solution around.
Madam Chair, can I just quickly
Member Williams?
This particular view or the breakdown of the units, I think, is particularly important, and I'm hopeful that we in the coalition, I'm assuming the coalition is continually looking at this, because that really tells the story of what are we actually getting done and what's actually happening and relative to that need that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'll point out, the final bullet point that we can't really see is from 2015 to 2020, roughly 1,150 downtown units were added. And around 10 to 15% of those have some level of affordability integrated into them.
Well, I'm going to jump in as well, because I think it's also important to recognize that adding supply in and of itself creates capacity in one type of housing or another. So if you're an empty nester, finding the appropriate kind of housing for you at that point in your life frees up a home with a lot of empty bedrooms in it right now that you're not using. So creating supply actually also benefits the other categories beyond the one wherever that supply is created potentially.
Absolutely. Thank you. So earlier this year, we shared the components of kind of the DMC EDA strategy and the housing work plan, and we're just going to go through each item here and just talk about some of the progress as it relates to our partners too. So again, the text is a little wonky on these slides, but one of the main objectives is to introduce new developers to the Rochester market. Part of our strategy was to host a May Housing Summit with our other agencies within the community earlier in May. We had over 150 people and organizations attend, both leading into that summit and coming out of that summit. We've hosted a number of developer site visits, 7 in 2022 with new housing developers to our market thus far. And we're focused our engagement for diversity of developers, developers of color specifically, and introducing the community and what the DMC project is about and the various opportunities across the community where they can engage. A second key part of the strategy is to collaborate with local partners. So part of the reason that Joe Marie and Dave and Taryn are joining us is our participation in the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing, which we're honored to be a part of. We joined in late 2021, started to establish regular meetings with staff members. So the Taryn, Dave, Joe Marie, and I have been meeting regularly on a staff level basis in order to help continue to advance this work over time. And as we speak, the coalition is starting to put together agreements, funding processes, and structures that Joe Marie was alluding to a little bit earlier. And the project data are still in progress, but some of the data that we even shared today on a previous slide is showing our updates towards that 400,000 unit goal that we have by 2030. Joe Marie referenced collaborative kind of consulting work that we're wanting to move forward with. And really it's kind of to identify the tools that we aren't currently using that can help us reach our 4,000 unit total. So if you're looking at the graph on the right, I think is a good visual of describing what we're intending to do. If we understand what our performance has got us to or led us to thus far using the current tools available to us, but in order to close this gap, understanding what those other tools that others are using or employing that could be available to us as well, we want to better understand because we're interested in meeting these housing demand targets as well. And then finally, the fourth strategy here is learning best practices and innovative approaches. So Wafa and I, as leading this housing effort within the DMC, have been attending a number of different housing summits locally, regionally, and nationally in order to kind of understand best practices, but also with an eye on some innovative housing approaches as well. So I already mentioned the home ownership and multifamily developments. There's not too many people doing this across the country currently. But if there is anyone out there that's listening right now, we'd be interested in speaking with you. We're also interested in some sustainability innovations, consider it passive house certification or other kind of performance that can help reduce the utility costs of people living within these facilities. And then finally, we're also keen to understand developers that have experience that can limit the amount of construction time it takes. Because ultimately we're at a little bit of a race against time here with 2030, and that if we can condense the construction period by using prefabricated construction methods, perhaps we can get these units to market more quickly and provide home opportunities more quickly too.
Kevin, just a moment, please. Member Carlson.
Oh, I just wanted to start the comments. I don't
Okay,
have to
all right. Go ahead and
interrupt.
finish up. Go ahead and finish up.
The final strategy for us that isn't in a slide was to align resources within the DMC EDA. So my position in New Title and Wafa joining our team too is part of that strategy. But that was all my.
Thank you. All right, now Member Carlson.
Well, thank you for being here. It's really a highlight of our community. The work that the Housing Coalition is doing together and having some real resources behind it right now is really hopeful and exciting. Speaking of resources, we know as we think specifically about downtown, we have only so much space and only so much money to invest from DMC, from our partners, from what the city can do to incentivize development. How are you starting to think about sort of how do you compare how we have previously invested public dollars or resources in order to get those few hundred units compared to really what we have available from a public investment perspective to get to where we need to go by 2030? Because being bold and being innovative are needing to be at the top of the list in order to actually make a dent in meeting our needs. So just wanted you to sort of reflect on the reality of that situation.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And in some ways, I see some ties to a previous presentation about the metrics today that Catherine shared. Some of the encouraging data that she shared today was 2 of those 14 projects, market rate projects, move forward without any sort of public assistance integrated into them. And that's really, I think, a positive sign of the market kind of maturing, as well as people better understanding what the opportunity is and how they can build projects that cash flow appropriately and kind of meet their investment expectations too. So ultimately, I see more market rate projects moving forward without public assistance as a key part of that strategy, and really maybe our resources being focused. And part of Joe Marie's kind of strategy from the Maxwell report, I think, focuses on this too, of aligning resources in order to help achieve these deeper levels of subsidy that are needed for 50% AMI units or lower than that. So I think it's kind of a mixed income approach that's really needed here in order to help make these dollars go as far as they possibly can.
I agree. I have also been subject of requests from developers of market rate apartments or buildings that still want public subsidy of some sort. So with just the reality of supply and workforce costs right now, there is support needed. So appreciate the reflections though.
Member Campbell and then Member Williams.
I just have a couple quick questions. I've been deeply involved with Habitat for Humanity, both in Florida and in the Twin Cities with Chris Coleman over the years. And is Habitat active in Rochester?
Yes, there's a Habitat organization here in Rochester. Recently new leadership, but yes.
The CEO of Habitat, Jonathan Record from Atlanta, is going to be in the Twin Cities the week after next. And some of us are going to be meeting with him. So I'm going to make darn sure that they emphasize their activity. The second one is I've been involved with our church in Minneapolis, and we've been deeply involved with the church in supplying affordable housing, and we've committed to a number of units over the next 5 years. Are the churches involved in affordable housing here at all?
So great question. We've really started to do a lot more outreach to churches and talking to them about that. I don't know, some of you know that my background was helping launch Jeremiah down here.
Oh, yeah.
And so, Father O'Connell made that all happen at the Basilica downtown, and a lot of the work I couldn't have done it without the faith community. So a part of my work plan is really to do that outreach to the faith communities that have land available, that are really interested in that might be afraid to get into it, but to tip their toes in that and really walk them through that, because I do think we have some opportunities here.
Sure.
And just a point of clarification, or maybe to build on Member Campbell's comments, there's 30 some Habitat affiliates in Minnesota, or at least there were a few years ago. So it would be great to just confirm that the head of the Rochester affiliate is scheduled in some fashion to meet with a representative from Habitat International. Member Williams.
Yeah, I just wanted to say congratulations. I know it's been a long road getting everybody to the table together, and this is really good progress. I'm glad to see this question that you raised earlier, RT, about where do we use our money and where do we use our scarce resources? And the market will build. Matter of fact, the market will continue to rush down here to build market rate housing. That's why what's the balance that we're seeing in production is really important. So how we use our dollars and the use of those TIF dollars in particular, I think is really important. So because the call that we had earlier, the public comment about the NOAA housing, and the market will buy those units. And so I am wondering, in that preservation strategy, are we tracking kind of the vulnerability of the units, particularly in the downtown zone, but actually throughout the community? Because I'll just call it gentrification happens slowly and quietly, right, at first, and it's just that's a private transaction. And there's nothing you can do, but we've seen that up in the Twin Cities, you know, to a great extent. And so that's a real concern. The other metric I just want to finish with that I'm really excited to see up there is actually the 7 new developers that you've identified, and to see Sherman here today introducing themselves, right? I want to see a community that is deluged with folks who want to build affordable housing, where there's competition to build affordable housing, where there's mixed income projects like the brick project. That I think we need to be as active recruiting developers and creating opportunities for development as we are in drawing and recruiting businesses, because the two are very much related.
Member Ryback.
Echo what they said. The thing I want to do is pick up on the council president's point about where subsidy goes. And I think, Paul, you raised this too. It does strike me we are at a point where market rate housing should not be subsidized in Rochester. I don't know if I would ever say draw a straight line, but I do think it's possible, especially because the state gave this city much more flexibility than other places, to look at the idea of whether there could be a more direct sharing of the increased tax base coming in here toward the idea of affordability. And specifically, I do believe there is a way with the tools we have, check it out, to be able to take the increased taxes being generated by for-profit housing to pull directly into affordable housing. The $100,000 we were just looking at, the additional money that a market rate housing project brought in could directly go to this pool that could begin to build up over time. That's a decision that's made at the local level. But I believe that when a person in the community says, well, we need affordable housing, and yet DMC and the city are building all this market housing. No, the market is doing that. But DMC and the city, especially the city, could designate specifically a linkage between those two things.
I was harassing Commissioner Tyne to see if he would weigh in on that idea.
Well, and I think that there are two really important points. One is we need to think strategically about where our investment dollars go, what's really needed for investment to occur, what's that ROI on our investment. And there are many tools in the tool bucket, tool chest, whatever the toolbox, to use to help advance these goals. I do appreciate how Joe Marie started the conversation, or Kevin, I don't remember which of you, about the fabulous collaboration between the city and the county to advance a project that, unfortunately, because of a unproductive legislative session, can't move forward. But that is that evidence that the city and the county leadership understands what a huge priority this is for this community, and is the level of collaboration that is evidenced in that project. Whether there are policy tools that can or should be implemented beyond that, we trust that the leadership at the city and the county level are looking at all of those opportunities and making wise judgments about the allocation of their own tax resources to meet community needs. But this will continue to be a pressing issue for this community. And we look forward to seeing how through Kevin or through ourselves, we can continue to do our part to advance those goals. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Patrick, any other, or Joe Marie, any closing comments?
Thank you.
Patrick, any other comments on this issue?
None for me. No.
All right, well, we thank you for this. This is an important topic, so we're
Done.
glad that we were able to devote some time to it. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries with a few seconds to spare. So thank you for your efforts to help keep us on time, Patrick and staff, and thank you everyone for your attendance today.